Hi, I'm Debbie, your health coach for today. Welcome to Fun in Your Kitchen. Today we're going to do two recordings. We're going to have a part one and a part two. And we are going to be making a corn-free cornbread. Everything is gluten-free, so no concerns about that. And then on the second part, I'm going to show you how to use the cornbread to create your Thanksgiving stuffing or anytime stuffing. So the recipe that I am using originally came from the magazine Simply Gluten-free. It was bought out by another company called Gluten-free and More. And you can go to their website, glutenfreeandmore.com, and look up these recipes. But we will give you the links as well for you to get to it. The first recipe that we're going to do today, the corn-free cornbread, if you're making the stuffing, you would be making two batches. And you could just double up all the ingredients and then just either make one large cornbread or make them in two separate 8x8 or 9x9 square pans. Because for the recipe, you will need two batches. Now, the recipe for the stuffing, if you don't want such a large portion, could be made in half, and therefore you would only need the one recipe and then just cut all your ingredients for the stuffing in half. And I'll get into that when we do part two. All right, so today we're going to start out by going ahead and cracking 3 eggs. This takes 3 eggs. Now, I know some of you may not be able to do egg. You might be able to do duck eggs. And if that was the case, instead of 3 eggs, I would only use 2. And if you cannot do eggs at all, then you could do an option. In this case, I would choose to do a flaxseed egg. And you would have to do this for 3 eggs. So you would triple this recipe. But for for a flaxseed egg, you would take 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed, mix it with 3 tablespoons of water, stir it up, and then let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes or so it will get thicker. And that equals 1 egg. And so in this case, you would create and do 3 tablespoons of the flaxseed to 9 tablespoons of water. All right, so the recipe is very simple. I've preheated my oven already to 350 degrees. And what you do want to do for the pan that you're going to make it in, you want to pre-grease the pan. And what I did today is I used, and I think I have it somewhere over here. So it's just clarified butter. And you could also use Kerrygold butter. And this is if you're doing dairy. Kerrygold is from grass-fed cows, so it's a very good source. And if you cannot do the dairy, you could use in place of it coconut oil. And what I would recommend, even though it calls for a half a cup, I would recommend doing a little bit less. Coconut oil seems to have a little bit more oily consistency to it. And so therefore I would do maybe more like a third of a cup of coconut oil. And you would want that to be melted. All right, the reason I'm doing the eggs in a separate bowl is only because I want to make sure that when I cracked my eggs, I did not get any shells in there. And this way, this guarantees that I don't have that. So the directions say in a large mixing bowl to whisk all ingredients together. So my first ingredient that they show is the half a cup of butter. So this is, I've already My ghee was nice and melted already. Put that in there. And then the next ingredient is 3 tablespoons of honey. If for any reason you can't do honey, you could substitute maple syrup if necessary. We don't want to use regular sugar for this, and plus we want the consistency of a liquid. I've never tried using date syrup. That could be another possibility as well. All right. Put that down. All right. Next is the eggs. Put that in there. And then it calls for 1.5 cups of almond flour. So I have my almond flour right here. This is a 1/2 cup serving, so I'm going to do a 1/2 cup 3 times. Everything is just dumped right into the bowl. And the next thing is a 1/2 cup of arrowroot or tapioca starch. So I'm using the Bob's Red Mill arrowroot. There are some people who are sensitive to tapioca, so in any recipe, arrowroot flour would be a great substitution. So if you ever see tapioca and you don't have tapioca starch and you have arrowroot, you can always substitute one for the other. And then the last is there's 2 more ingredients. We need 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And then a 1/2 teaspoon. It calls for kosher salt. I'm not currently at home in my regular kitchen today, so I'm just using some sea salt, and I'm sure that will be fine. But we only need a 1/2 teaspoon. And this gets all mixed together. And it says to whisk. I did whisk mixed up my eggs ahead of time. I like to use the whisk, except that when I'm working with baking products, and I'm working with a dough, I find it really hard when I'm whisking because it gets all caught in there. So I just like to use a spoon. And what we want to do is make sure that this consistency here is very smooth. And I'll show you that in just a moment. So just a nice smooth consistency, no lumps. And then I'm going to pour it into my prepared pan. Slide this a little bit over there. Now, I'm going to pour this in, going to get it so that it smooths out. And actually best for this is to take one of these rubber or silicone spatulas, because that helps you get everything out of the bowl so you don't miss anything. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to smooth this out so that it's spread out over the pan. Now, this recipe can be used alone, not necessarily for the stuffing, and it will make cornbread. If you want the cornbread to be a little bit taller, then because it will rise a little bit, not a whole lot. But if you want it to be as taller, just put it into a smaller pan. I think the one I'm using here is a 9x9, so an 8x8, or even a rectangular pan if you're using it for cornbread. And then you can just cut it in squares. I'm just finishing up moving this out. Show you what that looks like. And now I'm going to put it in the oven. The oven, as I said, is preheated to 350 degrees. And I'm going to do it for 20 to 25 minutes. So what I usually do is set my timer for 20 minutes. I want to make sure that the top is golden, but not necessarily burnt. And so I'm going to put it in right now. And if you give me one moment for just a second here, I have pre-made one of these cornbreads so that you don't have to wait the 25 minutes. And this is how it will come out and look. Now, if you're serving it for cornbread, you're just going to cut it into squares or rectangles. For the stuffing, I'm going to show you how that needs to be cut, and I will show you that in the next video. So that's it. That's all that this takes, is that quick mix everything in the bowl, put it in the oven, and it comes out, and then just let it sit and cool, and it's ready to go. So enjoy.